Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to our July 2022 Sigstore community meeting. Glad you could all join us. Okay, we are going to jump straight into things and just start with a project round robin. So, do we have anyone with any updates for the Ricoh project? Okay, and Fulcio, cosine. You can tell it was a long weekend in North America. With the Ricoh show, there were no Ricoh updates. Excellent. Okay, git sign. We can always jump back to those as folks come in, but let's keep it moving. Billy, I saw Billy. Was that from you?
Yeah, so just a small update here. I'm going to cut the 0.2 release this afternoon. If there's anything that is on your mind or you want in before I cut the release, just let me know. Otherwise, yeah, look forward to it.
Awesome, thank you. And I have sections for Java, Python, and Root. Okay, I'm going to say just no significant changes since last week. Okay, on to SixStore GA. I don't know if folks have had a chance to see this, but it had a pretty important blog post went out last week on the 29th. And this is finally the formal response on where SixStore is at with general availability. It kind of covers a bit of the history of what's happened to date, and also what we're looking forward to in terms of a general availability for SixStore and its various components. And I think the TLDR is kind of looking at a 4-month out window of just running the services and finishing up some of the things listed, and then we should be in a good position to go live with GA. Is that a fair summary, Priya? Oh, Bob. Yep. Great. Yeah, so please do take a look if you haven't already, and do let us know if there's any questions or comments on that. And otherwise, we'll jump into normal SixStore GA updates. Is there anything since last week to update on, Priya and others?
Nothing for me. I don't know if anyone else has anything they want to update on. Jump in.
Okay, no worries. But yeah, no, I would suggest we can start referencing that blog post and looking at the various places on SixStore property that we talk about the GA, and just put pointers there so folks, when they come into it, kind of have a better understanding of what it means as they're adopting the project. Okay, moving on to the SixStore logo refresh. I do have something fun to share here. So we did have a lot of feedback on the Git sign logo, which is great. So there seemed to be general consensus around one of the designs in there, number 4, for those who remember. And let me just take a second to share a tab. Okay, so with that in mind, I think we had some consensus on the new logos for Git sign and also Fulcio. And so this is kind of the first proposal of sub-project colors, and they're put next to SixStore with the new logo and its full color palette. So the idea was to have something that all jives together. We use the SixStore blue throughout, but there is a way to sort of show everything is related to the SixStore project, but each thing is its own somewhat independent sub-project. So this is first revealed to the group. Any questions or comments or things you like, things you don't like?
It's pretty.
Thank you, Jack. Andres.
Yeah, should policy controller has its own logo? Like, should have its own logo, or
Sorry, could you repeat that? I didn't catch
like,
the beginning.
should policy controller, now that it's like some kind of, it's been in a different repo and the docs are kind of split from cosine, should it get also a new logo, or should it share with cosine everything?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Like I'm not sure there was specific kind of guidance around who gets a logo or not. So I don't know, do folks have thoughts? I think logos are pretty useful when things start to have their own identity and people talk about them as independent things you might adopt or use, and we want to kind of build a brand out around that. Any thoughts around like policy controller from folks?
It will be good to have it.
I think there's like a more general question about like how many projects have and should have a logo, and I think there's also something about we have a lot of little things that could use a logo, but we cannot just give every logo to the, like, I don't know, 50 repos we have out there. I wonder if we want to just define like a recommendation saying like, hey, once your project has like this amount of usage, maybe not hard numbers, but just kind of like, hey, if you want your project within SixStore to have a logo, why don't you propose it in the community meeting saying why is it like, why does it need it, right, to be like identified? At the end of the day, I think it's also a matter of having resources, and I really don't know if we have like a designer on staff, or we need to like collect a batch of the projects and then send them over and then come back and so on and so forth.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And like with my experience in CDF, like we take something like the Tecton project and they would do logos for any kind of part of the project that was significant. And in that case, like CDF, the parent organization, would support them with the logos on demand. And it was kind of nice because they always tied it back to their cat logo, so it all kind of fit together. So yeah, I think it makes sense coming up with something, some similar guidelines, and I think like I can see a place where we get to where we've got a kind of, you know, Sigstore for Python or for Java. It might be nice to kind of be able to have some stronger identities with those. Okay, let me take a look at some of the guidelines other projects might have, and maybe there's something lightweight we can borrow and use that. And also, like, I think to a certain extent, we can always start off, if folks do want to do their own logos for the sub-projects, that's not a bad route to start from as well. It doesn't all have to be kind of formalized. Okay, any other comments on the current ones? Should we make the Git sign? Sorry, I missed it. Should we make the Git sign checkmark green instead of red? Yeah, we could swap that. I think the reason that one I actually requested red in a little bit of a nod to the Git logo. But yeah, we can would switching out, we could switch it to the green like of Fulcio and change the Fulcio color to avoid using red completely in the palette. How does that sound to folks? It's a colorblind. I didn't even notice that. Okay, yeah, let's stay away from the red in that case.
Yeah, orange blue is a common sort of combination to help folks who are colorblind.
Yes.
Or using, I mean, in some sense, you can sort of get away with this because they're different logos.
Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah.
I don't mean to like push for that. I just found it funny that I thought it was green for a while. Yeah, like it's just hard to make a logo that like it's perfectly friendly with all colorblind types.
Yeah, I can try a few tweaks and see what optimize where we can. Okay, and then yeah, following that, the plan will be then to just start propagating the logos in all the various properties and just going around updating where SixStore is used. Yes. Right, moving on to outreach and events. Yeah, no big updates here, but just to clarify, for KubeCon North America, we are still pursuing a couple of avenues. One is looking at a one-day co-located event, aiming to get a room for about 200 folks and to have that focused on a set of SixStore talks, hopefully including a lot of case studies from folks using SixStore in practice. And then as a distinct item, I think we are also considering having a booth during the main conference as a place for people to gather, ask the experts, or just chat with community folks in general. So we'll keep you posted as those things shape up, or if we do end up being in a position to run a call for papers. And separately from that, case studies. I don't know if folks recall a while back, I had a call out for various case studies of folks using SixStore out in the wild. We do have a couple of folks who are working on them. I don't know if we have Fabian on the call, but he works with folks at Edgeless, and he's willing to start working on one case study. So the idea is that once this is written up, we will post it on the SixStore main blog, and then perhaps link it off to somewhere on the website, which showcases all different types of case studies. Does anybody know, I was wondering if Luke or someone was here, on what the process is for just getting blog posts up on the Medium site?
I think it's pretty much whoever has creds. That I think Luke is the one who has the creds, just from like previous publications. I think also Dan does have them. I don't know how Medium exactly works, but I know that they have approved blog posts from me in the past.
So just hit up Dan and Luke as something is ready.
Sure. Another thing that I wanted to add is, I guess I can wait for any other business actually.
Okay, any other
Okay.
business?
So
Yeah,
I just wanted to highlight that somebody from the community wrote a blog post about SixStore Python and their experience with it, and I wonder if we want to signal boost that somehow. Let me share the link. It's in the channel, but yeah, Kushal does. I don't know if they are in the call, but I think it would be.
Yeah, if you could share the link, that sounds interesting.
Yeah, my computer, I think it's dying. It just doesn't like all of this like Chromium instances running. Here's a link. I don't know if we want to blog it or we just want to say like, hey, this individual wrote a blog post about their experience with SixStore Python.
Great. Yeah, I guess that promoting that through SixStore Social. And again, I guess I'm assuming Luke is the contact for that.
Yeah, I believe so.
Right. It brings up another question for me, and maybe this is something we can discuss. Like when we come onto the SixStore website, we don't, I do wonder whether we should have a section which is based on language community. So just coming in and sort of saying, here's SixStore, here's how you might use it in Java, here's how you might use it in Python. And then we could have a potentially a landing page for each community that's as it's progressing of here's the latest, here's some blog posts. Would that be useful for folks, do you think?
I think that'd be interesting. For example, on in particular in SixStore Python, I think it would be interesting to point to like existing PEPs around software signing. Like there's PEP 480 that tries to combine TOF and PyPI, and I think there's a question to like mention SixStore as well. So it could also help funnel people into the right conversations around how to integrate their ecosystem better with like SixStore plus anything else.
Okay. Yeah, no, I'll think we'll think about, and I know we still have sort of plans for kind of a documentation focus and rehash of the website. So I'll throw that in the list, and well, I'm sure we can plan something at some point to bring in a wider discussion around it. But yeah, in the meantime, let's see if we can get that blog post promoted and retweeted, or even, I don't know whether we repost things on Medium, but yeah, I'd certainly be +1 to have that featured on the SixStore blog. Did you say you knew the author, Santiago, or you just came across it?
No, they were just in the Slack, and they were asking questions, and they were like, "Oh, I wrote a blog post about it." And I was like, "Oh,
Awesome.
yeah,
Love to see it.
that's cool." Generally.
Okay. Anyway, is there any other business? Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, so I had a couple of questions about some of the stuff regarding moving to sort of 1.0, if there's nothing else to chat about. In particular, I think I had a couple of questions regarding like Recore 1.0, just because I know in the community, I think there's some confusion as to what Recore is actually really intended for, and what like the use cases that will be supported in 1.0, because a lot of folks are using Recore for all sorts of things, and it sounds like some of those use cases are really not intended, at least yet. And so some of those use cases might not be like something that we want to call out as just sort of saying, hey, here's the things that are supported for 1.0. And separately, I think one of the things was just given that there's a lot of discussion today about, Recore holding on to records of attestations and all this other stuff, that a lot of folks are not really sure if, some people today are starting to use Recore as their sort of canonical store of where their attestations live. And based on some of the conversations within the community and within this group, it sounds like that's probably not the intention. But I think, some of these things, as we kind of push towards 1.0, might be worthwhile to clarify. I hope I made sense there.
Yeah, and I think that is. Did anyone want to take a bash at answering? Zach, are you talking? You're on mute.
I'll take an attempt at muddying the waters. So I guess to me, the guarantees around 1.0 have a lot less to do with any one particular use case, and have a lot more to do with, if something winds up in Recore, it's still going to be readable for this period of time, and has a lot to do with availability, and has a lot to do with, what volume of sort of write requests are we going to be able to handle. And I think we have, sort of blessed use cases in mind for what we want people to do with that. But can I ask you, Michael, what do you think might break? Like if that's the guarantee we provide, what could go wrong if people are using it for different use cases than what we originally had in mind?
Well, so I don't think it's necessary. So I think there's two separate problems. One is the I guess the general stability of Recore, which it sounds like, hey, we're just trying to guarantee the stability of Recore within some SLO or something like that. That makes sense. I think the thing also is that as we kind of hit 1.0, I know a lot of folks in the community are just going to say, okay, great, what are those blessed use cases? Just so we have an understanding of what should be living in Recore. and so on. Because like I know and I think it's kind of related in the sense of as SixStore kind of reaches that general that GA release, a lot of folks are now saying, great, what are the use cases, right? Because there's lots of things you could do with SixStore. I can sign all sorts of things, but there's certain things that folks are saying, you might be able to do this, but it's really not one of the things that we were really, at least yet, looking at. And just some of those things, I think, sort of making folks understand, right? Because like, you ask folks like, where should I be storing my attestations? Most people say, oh, if you're using containers, you should store it in OCI. But a lot of folks are saying, actually, like, what happens if I don't have a container? Can I sign, I don't know, a Java jar and include that somehow in the jar? And the answer today with SixStore is like, no, you can't really, but you could store the attestation potentially in Recore, or you could store it somewhere else. And I think some of those use cases, at least helping folks understand, like, oh, these are the core use cases of SixStore that are supported in 1.0, I think would also be useful.
Yeah, that clarifies a lot. I think I don't have an answer to you, but I think it is a great idea to, and sort of as we roll out 1.0, to sort of tell people what they should be using Recore for, and basically say everything else, talk to us in Slack. We'll try to help, but outside of us upholding the guarantees, that's all. That's the SLOs and so on. That's all you got.
Yeah. So as an example, some folks have been starting to use Recore to sort of check other people's attestations. And that sort of thing, if you start to see tons and tons and tons of folks of writing and reading to Recore and using it almost like a database, as opposed to a record store, like a store that this thing has happened at this time or whatever, I think, we could end up also in a situation where a lot of people are going to start expecting it to do a thing that it wasn't designed for.
It's never happened before in software. Cool. Now, I think this is, it's a really interesting discussion, and one I think we should revisit. And just bearing in mind, I think there's not our usual quorum of folks on the call, but it's a worthwhile one as we gear up to GA, being clear about those use cases. And I think looking beyond GA, and certainly as I start to talk to more folks actually using SixStore, starting to think about roadmaps, and we can talk about blessed use cases, but we should also be talking about if folks want to come in and extend those use cases and figure out how does it work with Javas and Jar. There's a path for them to talk about what they would like to support and how that fits together. Jack?
Yeah, I should probably say something more than a passive-aggressive remark in the comments about having a searchable database. For those of you who know me, I have for many years, and by many years I mean about a year and a half, lobbied for the idea of a universal asset graph, or at least some database that is meant to be a canonical shared representation that is optimized for querying easily and quickly. That is not the log. Like, the log should be a feedstock, but it should be thought of more as a write-only or an append-only data structure, rather than something that is intended for search. And that these are very different kinds of missions. So I would generally say I'm fine with writing as much as possible to the log to create that tamper-evident series of events with a trustworthy time index. But it should then be transformed into a form that is oriented towards easy querying.
So
that's my statement of motherhood and apple pie and so forth. I'm sorry, Santiago, go ahead.
I haven't jumped in, and sorry, I'm jumping in between. But my understanding is this is why we also want to have a more thorough monitoring project, because we're already looking at every single entry that comes in, and we're actually very close to just indexing and presenting this for users. I think being able to read the log and essentially provide it in an index way is useful. Now, I think part of the problem is, do we need to read the log and that's enough, or do we need to read the log and go to an OCI registry and then figure that out? And what does that really mean? it's almost as if we said like, oh, certificate transparency works very well, but the only thing that we keep is lead certificates and no reference to the roots. So what do we do about it? And in fact, the certificate transparency logs do actually need to check the certificate chain before they let it into the log itself, right? So I'm not like disagreeing with anybody, but I think since we're taking on a bigger like challenge, we may want to like outline exactly where do we cut in terms of like what's in the log and what's not in the log. How do we provide meaningful security guarantees without just making CT 2.0 and that's it.
Michael?
Yeah, so that actually, yeah, the a lot of what I was saying was actually also predicated on that sort of idea that, you know, Jacques' sort of universal asset graph and some of the other stuff. You know, I'm working with Santiago and Brendan Lum and a few other folks on some sorts of stuff in this area, and a better understanding like stuff like, okay, what should live in Recore or be the canonical store in you know, what should be canonically stored in Recore and what shouldn't, is also going to help us better understand like what we should be putting into Recore versus other tools that we're building out. With the idea, right, like just, you know, I don't want to go too deep down the rabbit hole of all the potential use cases and whatever, but like the idea there being that, you know, lots of people are going to be attesting to all sorts of different things, and you're going to have third-party people attesting to other people's artifacts, and they're not going to have access to push those attestations into, let's say, you know, their container registry, but they can, you know, push it into some other database that just sort of says that is a public store of knowledge and saying, hey, if you trust this identity of this third party, then you trust their attestation or whatever, right? And I think these sorts of things are things we're trying to kind of better understand, like, does it make sense to put a lot of this into Recore versus something else?
Any follow-up? Okay, I think this is one with, we'll leave this on the agenda and certainly let folks know asynchronously. We should come back to it and have a build on this discussion and see kind of what we can capture or what makes sense to explore. Cool. Lost the notes. Okay, any other business before we drop into introductions? Okay, intros. Anybody want to say hi and introduce themselves? Okay, I don't see any requests, but thanks everybody who was able to join today. And we'll pick up the discussion next week, and I'm sure we'll have a lot more people to join. But glad you could all make it. And thanks, and have a good week.